You're listening to Season 1 of Ding Dong Darkness Time. If this is your first time joining us, we hope you'll check out all the other episodes of this season, each one delving into the dark side of the arts. If you love it, tell the world. In the meantime, let's take a little trip, shall we? Well, hello there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Ding Dong Darkness Time. I am your host, Allison Dixon, and I'm here with my awesome friend. I don't know how to talk today. I'm here with my friend, Chris Armstrong, our recurring co-host. And today we are continuing our exploration of the dark arts in Season 1. The dark arts without Harry Potter, as we sort of coined it. Exactly. And previous episodes, we covered music. We covered, what else did we cover? Oh, sculpture. Mm-hmm. And a little bit of other art kind of thrown in there too when we talked about the Denver airport and all the weirdness. And today we are covering specifically human-built structures, because not all of them are buildings, right? You know, we're not going straight for like the haunted locale, and we're not really looking necessarily for the most macabre of the macabre.
So we're not talking about manors on a hill beset by lightning.
We are not doing that. We are not doing the Gothic mansion with the... Well, we are doing a Gothic mansion. We're doing a...
I was going to say, I'm scrapping all my notes here. Let me quickly...
I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. We are doing some architecture that fits into that time period, but we're kind of branching out from beyond that a little bit. And also, we have our own personal story that we want to share about a building that Chris and I visited many years ago. I'm sorry to say it was that many years ago. 2006 was when we went on that little adventure.
I'm mathing in my head. Is that 16 years ago?
Yeah, that feels about right.
Oh, yowza.
Yeah. So I actually came across this idea when I was doing research on something else, actually, that we'll talk about later. Discovered the existence of a mansion that is out in San Jose, California, and was the inspiration for Walt Disney's The Haunted Mansion attraction at the Disney parks.
I did not know that.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I didn't know that either. Yeah. And it reads and feels a lot like something out of Alice in Wonderland or something very surreal and kind of very subtly creepy, although you can't quite put your finger on exactly why. But I think as we delve into this, we'll learn a little bit more. And that is about the Winchester Mystery House, which is the house that was built by the widow of William Winchester, who was one of the founders of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, you know, rifles and whatnot. And Sarah Lockwood Party, that's her full name, before she became a Winchester.
Is that Party like P-A-R-T-Y?
Oh, no, actually, P-A-R-D-E-E.
Oh,
but
okay.
I imagine if I had a last name that sounded a little bit like Party, that I would make use of that.
I'd bust into a room and be like, party time. Yeah.
Yeah, the party is here. The party has arrived.
Everyone rolls their eyes. Like, okay.
You know, and given what Sarah built here, I could see that she might appreciate that. She was not a woman of her time in a lot of ways that we'll discuss.
It feels like it's going to be a recurring theme. People sort of out of time for this episode and the next one we're doing.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. Because I don't think that you can have memorable, strange art without yourself being a little bit strange yourself. I think there's something that sets you apart. So it all kind of feeds
Beetlejuice with Winona Ryder's character? She's talking about the handbook. Yes. She's like, I myself am too strange and unusual.
Exactly. I mean, who can't relate to that a little bit?
Seriously.
So a quick little background on this house. When William Winchester, he passed away of tuberculosis, she moved in 1884. She moved out to San Jose, California from New Haven, Connecticut. And she was kind of in deep mourning because, you know, she dearly loved her husband, but they also had an infant daughter that passed away as well. So she,
Oh, wow.
yeah, it was a very sad story, but she inherited this massive fortune. She not only inherited the money that they had, which was $20 million back then. $20 million in 1884 is about
Oh my God.
$500 million in today's money. In addition to that, she owned 50% of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. So
Oh, wow.
she had a steady income. I think the article that I read estimated that she was making in that day's dollars about $1,000 a day. The arms business, man, it definitely pays. And
she's going to need that fortune for this mystery house that she's going to construct. That's for darn sure.
Exactly. So legend has it that she met with a medium after her husband's death, and that person convinced her to seek a new life out west and told her that she needed to build a house that was large enough to contain the spirits of those who were killed by Winchester rifles. A part of me feels like that medium had an agenda of her own, like, you know.
It kind of feels like this is the lore, right? That she built this house to contain the souls of the victims of her husband's company, right?
Right.
She's now the 50% shareholder. It just has that feel of like, it's really enticing, but it's too good to be true. Like, I don't know if that's the right word, but like, it just has that.
It feels like a story.
Yeah, the sniff test of folklore. Like, this is what happens when you take the tour, when you go to this mystery house. And the tour guide says this, and it's great storytelling. Is it true? I don't know. Did you find out? Is it kind of up in the air?
Oh, yeah. There ends up being... I want to say you come away with a definite sense that there was a bit of lore built around her because of who she was. She was this solitary woman in the 1800s. She died in 1922, but she lived regardless this life of where women fit into very narrow specific roles. And so she was painted a certain way that I think befitted that, and also just sort of the appeal in the literary sense of this mad woman living alone in this giant mansion. And so she goes out there and builds this unfinished farmhouse that was sitting on a very large plot of land. And what is true is that she did spend the next 38 years, aka the rest of her life, remodeling this home. Now, one part of folklore states that the construction never stopped, ever. It went on, and that was part of the whole confusing the spirits thing. Because if
wait, like 38 years of sustained construction,
yes,
like daily?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. That doesn't sound right.
No. According to a biographer, they would take some breaks from the building. I would say that it was probably fairly consistent throughout the year. She would probably always have some form of worker on the property.
Sure.
Given all the things that she was into and the things that she did with this place. So the house at its peak literally stood 7 stories high, and it was more tall than it was sprawling. It looked more like a castle at one point, up until the 1906 earthquake, and it caused a lot of structural damage. And she was worried that it would just come collapsing down. So she had the whole upper stories removed. It's now only 3 stories high. So she had the thing chopped in half horizontally, like a cake, like a layer cake. You just cut it off.
Wow. Off with its head.
Nice dovetail back to Alice in Wonderland. She decided then she was going to build out rather than up from that point. And so that's exactly what she did. Also, they have to estimate that the house is about 24,000 square feet. There are no blueprints and there are no plans of any kind. And that's because she directed all the construction herself, and it was very haphazard. She would just kind of get this idea in her head, and she had the money to hire people to do it. And they just did it because she was the woman with the money.
Can you imagine being the contractor on this project where you're like, okay, now you want a stairway with 7 turns, but it goes up 1 floor. Sarah, is that what you're telling me today?
Yeah.
Okay, you're paying me, whatever. Like, that had to be...
That would be...
Oh my goodness.
That would be the best show on HGTV. If they could do that. Could you imagine like a reality series with a construction company living with a
Discover
really
Channel? Oh my God. A&E, one of those with, yeah, they totally have that.
There has to be some eccentric, crazy, if not billionaire, then very multimillionaire that just wants to keep adding onto the house or doing some project, and it's just a constant thing, right? I think this
Right, or deconstructing bridges for their super yachts.
Oh,
Just
I mean,
thoughts, just ideas.
I don't know.
For instances.
Perhaps. So 24,000 square feet is the best estimate. And
Wow.
so to put that into perspective, I did some maths, very minor, and some breakdowns and a little bit of Googling to help me out here. So I live in a very moderately sized ranch home. It's 1,700 square feet. It's not very big by any means. It's not the tiniest house, but it's definitely not huge. I could put 15 of these into the mystery house. And I imagine, look, Chris, you owned a home at one point. Do you remember the square footage on it? It was
about 16, so just a little bit smaller.
Yeah. Any of you out there that are living in modest homes can figure that. But you could fit about 3 Olive Gardens in there. A typical Olive Garden is about 8,000.
Which is an international standard of measurement, by the way. How many Olive Gardens would it take? That's hilarious.
Yeah, 8,000 square feet is a typical Olive Garden. So you could put 3 of them in there.
As it turns out, I worked at an Olive Garden, so I kind of know what you're talking about.
Yeah. That's why I picked the Olive Garden. I was originally going to go Cheesecake Factory, but then I was like, not everybody's been to a Cheesecake Factory still. And so then I thought, hey, Trader Joe's. You could fit 2 Trader Joe's into this house, and that's easy for me. I work at Trader Joe's as of this recording.
I will say they're not all built the same. I have a little baby Trader Joe, so mine's probably smaller than yours. But
yeah, they said there was like a range. Yeah, so then and then just to really go like, okay, this is a big house, but it isn't the biggest thing ever. It's only about 1/8 the square footage of a Walmart Supercenter.
Okay.
Walmart Supercenter is about 180,000 square feet. So you could really put that into perspective, like the sizes of the structures that we're dealing with. I thought that was just fun to try to imagine it, because when you look at this house online and they do these drone flyovers, it just looks like this never-ending complex of buildings that are all connected, and it is just overwhelming. There's all these roof peaks and...
Well, that's the thing, though. Like, you think about a Walmart, it's just one big room, right? It's a big box. This house, from what I understand, and you're going to tell us.
Yeah.
But my recollection is, well, you said 3 floors, and also just a mishmash. Like you said, Sarah's like, okay, today we're going to do this. Okay, this year we're going to do that. This decade we're going to... It's just a hodgepodge. So it's like, it's not as simple as walking from one end of a building to another.
No.
It's like your own labyrinth, basically.
It would be impossible. I try to imagine, and this is now on my bucket list. I need to get to this house very badly because I need to be inside it. It is something else.
Is NC Escher a good way to put it? But because aren't there like stairways to nowhere? Or like doors to nowhere? But also, you know what? We're going to take it back to Harry Potter. You said not Harry Potter. But that's what Hogwarts is, right? Isn't it like a bunch of like crazy, goofy construction?
All it needs are talking portraits on the walls to really complete the picture.
And like stairs you can sink into and not be able to get out of.
Yeah.
You know, it's all it
terrifying. I love it. I absolutely love it. And I just thought it was fascinating to think about. But to me, thinking of it on a smaller scale, it feels so enormous.
Absolutely. For a home?
Yeah. And I'm hoping some of you were Googling this already if you're not in a car or whatever, or you've already seen it, or you're going to Google it, because there's some great fly-throughs and flyovers on YouTube. And you can also, of course, there's a ton of pictures on the Googs. And so when you look at it, you'll be able to see that the exteriors, like that pure Queen Anne style Victorian, or not Victorian, Queen Anne, which is post-Victoria style of architecture, where you have these turrets and finials and columns, and there's, it's very grand, and it looks like a storybook princess house.
Yeah, like the bright yellows and the reds.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like the turrets. It's funny. I live in Queen Anne. That's the name of the neighborhood I live in.
Nice.
How about that?
Very good.
I don't see any houses like this, nor that size. I don't think that's sustainable in Seattle. But
I don't think Seattle could support another massive mansion. And so you look at that, and then the inside, I thought this part was interesting. So there's this whole thing called the aesthetic movement, and this was very popular in the 19th century, especially, where every object in the place, from the doorknobs to the oven doors to the edge of the tables and all that, it was all decorated in some way. It was thought to uphold your moral, strength or whatever, and to feel good about your life if you lived in beautiful surroundings. It was an uplifting things. And this trend obviously continued. Any of us who have grandparents that were born in the early part of the 20th century, I'm thinking of my mom's mom going to her house, and how there wasn't like a single surface in the place that wasn't covered with a doily or an embroidery of some kind. And, the curtains were just perfectly pleated. And there was always these in the houses, from, I would say, the 50s and earlier, they all have some sort of like unique detailing and craftsmanship to them. It was like they surrounded themselves with art for the sake of art. You don't see that much these days. Things are a lot more austere, I would say. We can live in, we go for the more minimalist look. And when you buy a house, it's all very modern. It's all very clean lines. I would say that probably set in really hardcore in the 60s. And it just kind of, and nowadays even that feels more artistically expressive than some of these very generic boxes that we're moving into.
Yeah, it's very cheap. It's very cookie cutter, right? Like a lot of suburban neighborhoods, especially, it's just the developer for that neighborhood had 5 or 6 models. You chose from the model and you maybe picked a color, and that's what you get. So
yeah. Oh, and remembering like the wallpapers and the textures on ceilings, and growing up out here in the Midwest, we see a lot of houses like from this time period. There was a lot more people settling out here around, this time. And in the town that we graduated high school was established in it was like late 1700s. It has a long history.
Wow, is it that early? My goodness.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so if you travel in the downtown village area, you have all these houses built in the 1800s, and they are all kind of like that. If you go inside them, it feels very artistic, these houses. So I thought that was really interesting, and it really fed into the way that this place is decorated, because it's like that. Sarah was a massive collector of artifacts and loved all different types of decorating styles from all over the world. She put them all in the house. So you see these architectural elements from like Egypt, Persia, Greece, and Japan was a big one. She loved Japanese design. So you'll find these beautiful wooden parquet floors with like a fireplace that had lotus flowers in the tile work that were like embedded into, stuff like that, where it had a more Asian aesthetic, but it was in a very classical looking American or European setup. So to look at this house, you see, there's so much going on with the decoration. And she was really into motifs of where she had stained glass, wood carvings, and tiles, all with like birds, flowers, and spider webs. She loved nature. The spider webs were very recurrent, which gave it, again, that sort of like, I think that adds to the lore of the house. Like, she was also really into the number 13.
Oh yeah.
It was a fixation for her.
Interesting. Because of the status of the number as being kind of a cursed number, or
that's
just
a good question. Nothing that I researched explained that part of it. And that's what I think makes it easy for people to insert that into the explanations. So she already was a spiritualist. She already had spoken to a medium. I mean, that's not debated, and I'll get into that in a minute. But
quick question: isn't 13 a baker's dozen?
It is. Yeah.
Maybe she had a crush on a baker. We don't know. Who's to say?
There we go.
There
we go. Or yeah,
we think it's a cult and dark and scary, and really she's just like, no, my husband passed away, and I had this obsession, but got a crush too.
Yeah, exactly. And he bakes me 13 buttery hot buns.
Butter buns, all right.
Yeah. We don't, that's an odd number, but we'll live with it.
Don't ask questions.
So she would have like 13 crystals put into a stained glass window that she commissioned. And by the way, hundreds of these windows she had commissioned. And a lot of them she never displayed. She just collected them. A lot of them never were used. It just shows how much money she had. I mean, this making stained glass, especially back then, oh my God, extremely expensive.
Yeah.
And so the webs in the number 13 appear in many forms throughout the home. So it definitely shaped the perception of the house where this frightened, crazy woman lived, a place where she's trying to contain ghosts in this never-ending structure of spirits that are not at peace because they were killed by a Winchester rifle. We don't know if Remington had anything to say about this, or some of the other, or Colt, or whatever other manufacturers were operating at the time. But those spirits, of course, have nowhere to go. So basically, as we said already, there's a story that we're given, and then there's a real story. And it's not that the one we're telling you is less interesting. I just find that the untold story often tends to encompass a lot more interest because, I don't know, I think maybe once we dig in and try to understand it, it's like, I don't know, we always wonder like why that story wasn't enough. Why did it have to get spiced up? Because this story is interesting all its own. It encompasses both the aspects of the bizarre and the creepy aspects of this house, but we can also appreciate her actual story. She spent most of her life alone in this house. I mean, she's this grieving woman that has been through a lot, and she, I mean, really is a woman in a man's world in a very big way back then. And I don't imagine it was an easy life in a lot of ways, despite her having all the money in the world and all that. I think it's interesting that she made this her project, that this was her way of feeling fulfilled. Her house was like her testing ground. It was her laboratory. It was her canvas. And it's kind of fascinating to think that you could wake up one morning and just go, or what if we did this whole big thing to the house? Nobody gets to do that. I mean, none of us, the normal folk out here, it's like, I have projects I needed doing years ago. And I'm just like, oh.
That seems like an old-timey pursuit. Like people, granted, she had ridiculous money, so that's a different story. But it feels like an old-timey pursuit that, I don't know, maybe more people were able to do that. Maybe it's wrong. I don't know. I just feel like now you want to have someone come out and do a basic thing. It's like $500,000. It's $500, right? It just seems crazy. Yeah. And so, I'm curious, and if you're building to this, we can table it for later. Do we know what her motivation was? Was it really containing these ghosts of people who died the death? Did she truly believe that, or was it something else? I don't know, so I'm curious.
No, I mean, that is definitely something I'm looking forward to answering, because a lot of the stuff that she was into feeds that prevailing notion of that motivation. Okay, so for instance, the house has a seance room, which lends some credence to the folklore, but one thing people don't often consider is how common spiritualism was back in these days. And it was largely because of the Civil War. We lost million, I can't remember the exact death count of the Civil War. I think it was like 750,000 or maybe a little less than that. I can't remember. It was a lot of people dying. And there were a lot of grieving widows and grieving mothers losing sons, and, the widows losing their husbands. And so it made the whole seance thing more commonplace. So this isn't necessarily something that means like, oh, she was a witch, or she was like communing with the devils, or whatever, like all these things people want to feed into everything that she was doing in this house. No, it wasn't unusual during this time. So but the interesting thing about the seance room, it's actually creepy in its own way. And so there's a door that goes to exit the seance room. And when you open it, about 5 feet ahead is another door.
Okay.
And then you step into something that almost looks like a closet, open another door. And what that is a door that's in a closet of another bedroom.
Oh, wow.
Like there is stuff like that. Or there's walls in the hallways and they just have windows cut into them for no there's so many interior windows in this house and exterior, of course. And that's just one of many things. There are 2,000 doors in this house. 10,000 windows, 47 fireplaces, 40 staircases. 40 staircases.
This is not a visual medium. My mouth is just hanging open right now. That's...
Yeah.
Wow. 2,000 doors.
Right. And so many of them do not lead to anything. There was one door, and this was an interesting find, is you open it and behind it is a metal door. You open the metal door and it's the door to a safe. You get the safe open, there's another door inside of that you then open, and then there's the contents. And the only thing she ever kept in there apparently was her husband's obituary and a lock of their baby girl's hair. It's all she kept in that safe, in that massive thing. I mean, that's actually a true thing. And that, to me, speaks to exactly what her motivation was. I don't think it was motivated by the fear of spirits. I honestly think this was what she poured herself into when she was widowed.
Is this like her processing the profound loss? Like, was this her way of dealing with this awful loss of your husband, your child? Like, that's...
Because at that time, it's interesting that she never remarried. I feel like she felt like that was it for her. Like, he was it for her. And when she, a little bit like Betty White and her husband. I mean, her husband died in I think the 80s, I think it was, but she never wanted to remarry. She never even considered it. She, in her heart, that was still her husband, and she didn't want to. And some people do. And that's perfectly fine if you move on. I mean, absolutely no judgment there. I wouldn't be alive myself if my mom hadn't moved on from her grief from losing her first husband. And so that is something I'm not looking down on. But I definitely do feel like she lost her husband. She lost her baby. This is now her life.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing, too, is how innovative the designs were. So most of the staircases were really shallow. They call them easy risers because they're very shallow. You can go up a lot of stairs, and it's almost like a ramp that just has little notches cut in it.
So like short steps, is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Okay.
And so there were a lot of these kind of staircases throughout the house. And it's because she was only 4'10".
Wow.
She was a very small woman, and she ended up having very bad arthritis as she got older. And so she couldn't really lift her legs very easily.
Yeah.
So she had the house just filled with these easy risers. And she had a special shower built for herself. Showers were unheard of at this time, especially for women. Women were discouraged from using showers. We had to get in the bath and cover ourselves up with dirty water.
Sit in a pool of your own filth.
Exactly. She couldn't get into a bathtub, so she just used her resources to have a shower stall built for herself. It's almost like an early version of, those shower jets that come out from the shower walls, in addition to the big shower head that rains down the water. There's always
she was a pioneer, man. Oh my
she
gosh.
Was. That's the exact word. You use the exact word that I use. That's exactly what she was.
And just not conventional. You could go into that building, and if you don't know the history, why are these stairs so small? And your brain can kind of turn and start to concoct this story. She had trouble lifting her legs, so she needed some way to get through this massive house to do that. And it's just the dumb stuff of women can't shower. What are you talking about? This is
right.
It's so goofy. Also, if she has severe arthritis, she can't get down into a tub and then pull herself out.
God, I can barely do that. I'm 40 damn years old, and I'm like, oh God, getting down on the floor, forget about it.
Yeah, but she's like, I'm gonna have pulsing jets, and I'm gonna have Did she invent the rain shower head, the rainfall shower head? Did she invent that too?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is one of those she should be getting more credit than she ever got. She also did something very cool. She had a plumbing, it was so unusual to have plumbing in a house during this time, period, So of course she has it, but she would have a faucet in every room that she could have a faucet because she liked to have plants everywhere. I think she loved the idea of being able to have a faucet wherever you need one. Right? You have so many damn rooms in this house too. So it kind of reminds me when I was driving through Montana, and I felt like it was never going to end. And I was also worried that one tank of gas wouldn't be enough to get to the next gas station. So it's like that, but you're walking across a house that is the equivalent of Montana. It's this never ending sprawl of house. And then what if you get too far from a tap, you know, and you get thirsty? What if you freaking die of dehydration? Getting from one end of the house to the other. So yeah, a tap in every room, damn it.
Yeah.
But she did all of these things, though, really just because she was like trying to make her own life more accessible and more easy to live. I mean, all of these things that are in here, a lot of them had purpose in her mind.
Sure.
And some of it was also really nice. This shows her character as well. So she considered her servants' needs as well. And so she put these little like inserts in the corners of the stairs to keep the dust from gathering in the corners of the stairs so that it'd be easier to sweep. She had hot and cold water taps for every sink and built-in washboards and built-in soap holders. She had this really great intercom system that she came up with, like where you could run tubes to the different rooms and speak into the hole in the wall. And
did you ever see the, what is it? Not Bly Manor. What's the other one?
Haunting of Hill House.
Yeah, Hill House. Yeah, duh.
Yeah.
They have something like that. Like the tubes where they could talk between the rooms. Is it like that?
Yeah. Yes, it's exactly like that. It's exactly like that. So, and she came up with this neat little push buttons in every room too. So that if she was somewhere in the house and she needed one of her servants, she would push a button and it would light on a board in the kitchen.
Wow.
Where that would at least tell you what floor or area of the house that she's in. Like, this is the stuff.
She basically made the button that you hit when you want the flight attendant to come assist you.
Exactly.
Wow.
So
this is great. I love all this.
Yeah. So it ended up being that the house is just this testing ground. She was someone who was constantly thinking and trying to improve things. And she loved the act of testing things to see if they would work and then scrapping them if they didn't work. She was kind of a researcher, kind of a scientific mind. The sad thing is that she never patented any of her designs. So here is this woman who probably could have built an empire of products and innovations and things, but it just didn't occur to her. It wasn't part of her mindset. She already owned half of a company. Why would she want, maybe that empire was enough. And so these things that are in this house that are so unusual or that look like precursors of things that we're seeing now, this is what she did.
Yeah, it feels like the motivation wasn't profit, of course. It was comfort.
Yeah.
And I just have to wonder if it's not like people who stay busy to, in some ways, avoid your grief, right? If I stay busy, if I have this errand that's consuming, then I don't have to think about this awful thing in my life. It gives me a purpose. It gives me a focus. And I just have to wonder if that's not part of it as well.
Absolutely. I feel that that is a huge part of it. And so then if the people that are making the histories of this are the ones that think that this is weird or eccentric or inappropriate because this is a woman,
right?
They're the ones that are building the perception that we have. I mean, yes, you do take this very eccentric home that honestly isn't, well, it's worth more now, but it was worth nothing. After she died, she didn't bequeath the home to anybody.
Okay.
She just gave the possessions in the house to a niece, but said nothing of the house itself. And so appraisers at the time were like, this house isn't worth anything. It's kind of useless and with all this stuff, and it had damage from the earthquake. And so it was sold at a very low, crazy low number back in the 20s after she died. And so then it just kind of like was leased out over and over again. It fell into disrepair. Nobody really took much care of it. And then eventually they started to revitalize it and bring it back. And they added some new possessions that they had found of hers and eventually turned it into kind of a more of like a museum. So you can go in and do tours and everything. There have been the occasional like paranormal show. There's always one of those. But for the most part, it's really can be seen as like this beautiful art piece made by an eccentric woman. I don't think she was, ridden with guilt. She was just living her damn life, living her best life.
Right.
As a woman of that time can.
Right. I'm glad to hear, obviously, that's a lot of grief there. My worry is that it was a mental illness or something that was just an obsession that consumed her. And it doesn't sound like that's the case, which I'm very happy to hear, because what she went through is enough. You don't need more hardship than that. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that she did something in a lot of ways kind of enviable if we really think about it. So yeah, go visit Sarah Winchester's house. A lot of people that maintain it, I think they have a very deep love for it, and it shows.
Allison, we're all waiting for the real truth here, which is you're going to drop the bombshell that there's a door that goes down to the demon worshipping murder basement. You've led You've led people along far enough.
It's funny that you mentioned that. The next building we'll talk about here in a little while, after we talk about the one you have, might have one of those.
A murder basement. Oh my God.
A demon dungeon.
A demon dungeon. I mean, that's really a selling point. You want an open floor plan. You want stainless steel appliances and a demon dungeon.
Yes.
Like, that's every person on HGTV. That's their wish list.
I eat crayons for a living, and I have a budget of $8 billion.
Right.
All I really want is a demon dungeon.
For South by Southwest. And we own a sneakertorium, and you're like, what are these words? I repair old penny farthing bicycles? You're just like, oh my God, what is going on right now?
All right. Well, that's enough of me. Now, how about you, boo?
We're back to the darkness. Back to a structure that has haunted me since I first laid eyes on it. Back in about 2005 or 6. And we're going to go across the Pacific Ocean. We're leaving California. We're soaring across the ocean. We're going to land in a little place called North Korea.
Ah, yes.
Which already, North Korea is just such a place of lore and stories and suffering and just
mystery.
Yes, exactly. It's just, it's steeped with all this just really dark and twisty and sad and just fascinating storytelling.
We could do a whole season of this show on North Korea, to be honest.
You could do a whole podcast probably, right?
Right. Absolutely.
It's so fascinating. And the structure I'm talking about is the Ryugyong Hotel. And if you don't know what this is, do yourself a favor and stop right now and look it up. Ryugyong Hotel. You may not spell it correctly. You're gonna find it. It's gonna be super easy. Allison, how would you describe this structure, this hotel, this building?
It looks like either a mountainy thing or rocket ship, or it looks like alien spacecraft that just landed.
Oh.
It's terrifying in its shape. It's kind of nightmarish to look at.
Absolutely. And it towers over the rest of the capital, Pyongyang. This thing is over 1,000 feet tall. That's about 330 meters for people, I guess, pretty much outside the U.S. Does everyone use meters but us now? Are we the last holdout-ish? Okay.
Here and there, the British Commonwealth is kind of a weird mixed bag too. So
okay,
yeah,
well, that should cover all of us. If you're measuring things in something else, I apologize. You're not going to get a unit of measure out of us. How many Olive Gardens is this? That's the real question. So how many Olive Gardens tall? That's our new measure.
I need square footage.
Is this
and then I can absolutely tell you.
We have like Fahrenheit and we have Celsius for temperature, but Kelvins, so this is like Olive Gardens are like the Kelvins of distance.
Exactly. It would just know one Olive Garden equals 8,000 square feet, and you could pretty much just find out how many Olive Gardens everything is.
Yeah, y'all do the math. We're not a math cast here. Sorry.
Yeah.
Not a math cast.
But yeah, I mean, I can absolutely see why this haunted your brain when you saw it, because it is not even natural looking in a traditional architecture sense. It doesn't.
Certainly not.
You'll see there's nothing like this out there.
Do yourself a favor, look it up. I will say this much. It looks different now than it did for many, many years, for decades, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
So you might see something you're like, well, it looks kind of cool and interesting. It looks very sleek. Well, that's not how it started off. So let's dig in a little bit. So the Ryugyong Hotel, it's 105 stories. And as mentioned, it's in the capital of North Korea, Pyongyang. And it's this unmissable feature in the skyline. It really, because it's so angular and sharp, it does kind of cut across the skyline of the city. Nothing else is even remotely as tall as this thing.
Right.
It's the tallest building in the entirety of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. I'm just going to call it North Korea. That's a mouthful.
Yep, that works.
And it's slightly taller than the Eiffel Tower. So if you've seen the Eiffel Tower, you're at least familiar and have a sense. It's just a little bit taller.
Yeah, wow.
And it's unique, very one of a kind, almost a sinister shape, as you said. It's been called everything from a pyramid to a bat to a spaceship, a missile launch pad. And the name, Ryugyong, actually it translates basically into capital of willows, which I guess is one of the historic names for Pyongyang.
I see.
And that's what it's supposed to look like, a willow tree, I guess. I don't see it. I don't see it.
No.
There's a little bit of what I'm going to call retconning from Kim Jong-un, I believe, who is the current leader. I think he's the one who retconned it a little bit. We'll get to that. So anyway, it's also been called the Ryugyong Hotel, the 105 building officially, but it's also earned a lot of unflattering nicknames. The Hotel of Doom, Phantom Hotel, and it's been called the worst building in the history of mankind.
Wow. Hyperbole is a thing.
Hyperbole is a thing. But all of this bad press actually led to the government to deny its existence, scrub it from official photos, and remove it from maps.
Oh my God.
Yes.
But they didn't want to tear it down. It was almost like it's a propaganda move.
Well, that's a great point. So why do all that? Why go through all of this pretending the 105-story elephant in the room is not there? Because this building has never been occupied or used for its original purpose. It remains empty to this day, 34 years since construction began. How long did you say Sarah worked on the Winchester House? 38 years?
Yes, 38.
So almost the same amount of time they've been working on this thing on and off, and completely empty.
Is it owned by a grieving widow by any chance?
Well, it's definitely owned by grieving ancestors or descendants from the first supreme leader of North Korea, which we're going to get to.
Yeah.
Going to get to.
Oh, boy. Oh, awesome.
So what's also crazy, some have questioned whether it's even safe to occupy because it's basically set for decades, exposed to the elements, and built with inferior and unsafe materials.
So it's a wilting sculpture of that's just been sitting there.
It's a weeping willow, that's for sure. This thing is okay, so that's the overview. We're gonna jump into this a little bit. We're gonna see where this thing has come, because when I first was introduced to it, again around 2006 or so, is in a profound period of dormancy. Basically 16 years this thing sat untouched.
Wow.
And that's when I first learned about it. But if you go look it up now, you're going to see something that looks a little bit different. But just remind yourself, it's going to look sleek. It's going to look cool. It is empty inside.
It's a DeLorean. Okay. I might do an episode on the DeLorean. Let's just say it looks cool. Not very cool on the inside.
But at least there was something. It'd be like if you open the DeLorean and it's completely empty inside. There's no steering wheel. There's no upholstery. There's clearly no flux capacitor. But there's nothing inside. You're like, what a cool car. And you open it up and it's a cardboard box. Yeah. So that's kind of a little bit about what it is. Well, why is it? So as I mentioned, the hotel's unique design was intended to match the shape of a willow tree or a mountain. I like that. And actually, this may be the first time you've ever heard this. You and Kim Jong-un are thinking a little bit in the same way. How about that?
I know that's not the first time you thought
this. So, but it's got this like retro Soviet design, this neo-futurism that makes it look more like a missile of imposing drab concrete is really what this thing is made of.
Yeah. The concrete part, the first word that came to my mind before I thought of anything else was actually Soviet.
Oh, 100%.
It looks so much like something you would imagine and some futuristic Soviet, I will call it utopia for them. And this would be the towering missile that they use to aim nukes at America.
200%. You are so right. I am going to refer to this as the Spite Hotel. No one else has called it that. If you look it up.
We've marked it here, guys. Episode 3 of Ding Dong Darkness Time.
It's not so much I'm claiming ownership, but more like if someone looks it up and like, what is this dingbat talking about? That's not a thing other than in my mind. So let's go back to the 1980s. North Korea is in bed with the USSR, and its economy is stalling, growth is slowing, the national debt is climbing. Juxtapose that with South Korea, which had transformed into one of the world's most successful economies. Seoul was going to be hosting the 1988 Summer Olympics. It was transitioning to a capitalist democracy. Guess who was not super fan of that transition of South Korea? Kim Il-sung, the then supreme leader of North Korea. And little did they know, the Cold War was in its waning days, and both North and South Korea were still kind of actively competing for global prestige and legitimacy. North Korea needed to outdo South Korea. They needed to prove themselves better. This is one-upsmanship in the most blatant way possible. And what happens is that Seoul is participating in the construction of a mega hotel in Singapore. So it's not even in South Korea, but they're the ones who are kind of constructing it. And Kim Il-sung says, we're going to make a hotel that is going to surpass this and give North Korea a bustling tourist economy in the process.
It's kind of sad. This is like a sad sibling story, like the ugly sister and the hot sister. I'm going to get a boyfriend hotter than your boyfriend. Just you watch. No, I mean, the dynamic here is absolutely fascinating. Trying to imagine North Korea, to have the aspiration to be this world hub, this cosmopolitan place is such a contrast to really what we see now is like where they're just completely cloistered away from the world and nobody gets in.
Yeah, it's fascinating also because if you think about it, this is the same time that the US and USSR are kind of one-upping each other. The space race, right? That's a big deal. There's all this kind of back and forth, the nuclear arms race. And this same kind of competition, different, but still playing out in the Korean Peninsula between these two countries, trying to outmatch each other. And what's interesting too is, so like I said, South Korea is going to be hosting the 1988 Summer Olympics. So North Korea organizes the 1989 World Festival of Youth and Students.
Oh, interesting.
A socialist version of the Olympics. And
wow.
In planning this, they are going to build a massive hotel just in time for the event, which will steal the world record away from the South. Because basically, they're going to build one that's taller than the South Korean hotel.
Oh,
and it's going to be the tallest hotel, I believe, in all of Asia, if I remember correctly. It wasn't just in Korea, but all of Asia.
Right. I'm starting to feel a little sad, like sorry for North Korea that this is it's pathetic kind of.
It's going to get worse. It's going to get worse because, again, the Ryugyong Hotel was ambitious. It was going to be the world's largest hotel. And as it stands right now, its height was not surpassed until 2005, the Rose Tower in Dubai.
Wow.
So if that would have happened, this would have been decades and decades of this being the largest hotel in the world.
And that is a massive draw, I think, for that industry.
Absolutely.
To be able to make that claim. I mean, that is like your Michelin star.
Yeah, it's really meant to like bring in foreign nationals and bring in tourists and business people. And it's really meant to not only spur the economy, but be kind of a destination is how they're seeing it. And it was planned to be mixed use, right? They're going to have a hotel. They're going to have 3,000 hotel rooms. That's the common number. I've seen some sources say 7,665 rooms. I don't know how that's possible.
Depends on, I guess they would be tiny little coffin rooms.
I mean, there'd have to be. That sounds nuts. But 3,000, my goodness. 5 revolving restaurants, observation decks, casinos, nightclubs, lounges.
It's not enough to have them just stationary restaurants. No, they gotta spend.
And not just one,
but 5.
5 rotating restaurants.
Like Olive Gardens?
5 rotating Olive Gardens, everybody.
I mean, imagine? I'm just, for scale. I mean, that sounds like possibly they might be that big or bigger.
Well, and if you look at the building, the little cone at the top, that's where you'll see these little bands, and that's where those revolving restaurants were going to be. And I think above it was the observation deck. So, I mean, you're looking over the entirety of Pyongyang at that point. You can see everywhere. And it's 360 views. Got to be amazing.
Yeah.
But engineering problems. It wasn't ready in time, spoilers, for the festival. It did not come together for 1989. Well, I wonder why. Because the government already poured billions of dollars into the event. They built a new stadium. They expanded Pyongyang's airport, paving roads. And this is not a rich country. So they've already strained what was at this point a frail, just withering economy. And then, what are we going to add on top of that? The Soviet Union collapses just a few years later.
The perfect storm.
Absolutely. So this is what I saw in the official biography of Kim Jong-il. So just if you're confused, okay, so the first ruler of North Korea, the supreme leader, is Kim Il-sung. He's preceded by Kim Jong-il, who is then preceded by Kim Jong-un, who is the current leader.
Okay.
So just so everyone's clear. So the official biography of Kim Jong-il, the middle of the three, is that he was born in a secret military camp on Mount Paektu, the tallest mountain in the Korean Peninsula, which is depicted in the national emblem of North Korea, and that is what the building is meant to symbolize.
Ah, interesting.
Which doesn't make sense because he died after let's just not.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah,
Retcon.
That's a bad retcon. Bad one.
I mean, in the history of North Korean retcons, it's probably not even top of the list, top 10.
Right. Oh, they retcon everything.
My God. Oh, yes. Okay, so let's get a little bit into the construction. 1987, it commences. But as I said, a few years later, the Cold War ends, Soviet bloc collapses. Pyongyang is now deprived of its trading partners and resources to build this building. They don't have advanced materials that they need. This thing is made of reinforced concrete.
My God.
So part of the reason the structure looks like it does is because that building as reinforced concrete as like a cylinder would not be structurally able to stand up. So the design is in part because of the materials used. It's not made of steel and it can't support its own weight. So that's why it has that pyramid type shape. It gets smaller at the top for structural reasons. So that's a huge thing. By all accounts, they deprived 2% of their GDP to build this thing.
Wow.
Can you imagine 2% of your gross domestic product going to one building?
There's a lot to unpack about that. Given that, oh my God, I bet it was already not great to start with.
Right.
And then to dump it all into one thing when you have people
starving.
They're going to starve.
Yeah. Famine. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Let's just, make this giant dick extender because that's pretty much what it is. Absolute fail.
So then they're going to open it in 1992, which is the 80th birthday of President Kim Il-sung. But by 1992, basically what you get is the outer skeleton. You get the framework. But once again, economic turmoil hits or continues to hit, and their limited resources have to go elsewhere. They kind of let it be. And there's also issues at this time about the building methods and materials. Electricity in the country becomes scarce. Famine is widespread. This is a super low point. This is 1 year after the Berlin Wall comes down and the Soviet bloc starts to crumble.
Yikes.
So what do you have? You have an incomplete, unappealing hotel. Again, this cutting across the skyline. Can't avoid it. This is when they start, okay, well, we're going to take it out of photos. We're going to take it off of maps. We're going to pretend it doesn't even exist. Yeah. And then local guides, tour guides would just not acknowledge that it exists. That's just...
Oh, that's just so weird. Like, it doesn't look like much to me. That's like a line from Westworld where...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing to see here. Nothing to see here.
Yeah. So it's like you're just standing there looking at it. And I guess if you're just a person living there, the game. So you're like, oh, okay, I guess there's nothing there.
Absolutely, right? So it sits vacant. It has no windows, no fixtures, no fittings. It is a concrete shell. There's a rusting crane on top of this building, which the BBC called a reminder of the totalitarian state's thwarted ambition.
Oh my God. Wow.
And that crane's up there for a long ass time, y'all. 2 years later, 1994, President Kim Il-sung passes away and is named the eternal president of the DPRK.
Eternal president.
Eternal president.
Yay.
3 years of national mourning were announced. That sounds like a lot. I don't know if citizens actually mourned for 3 years, but that's the story.
Yeah, that's kind of silly. Sorry.
I mean,
No, maybe not silly, but I will say like the official one I think in Victorian times was 1 year. And you had to wear, if you were a woman, you had to wear heavy black dresses every day for a year when you were in mourning.
I'll say this much. I don't think it was authentic mourning. If it did truly go on for 3 years, or that was sort of we're still in mourning, everybody. If you didn't remember, it's year 2 of mourning. I feel like it's one of those, like, you didn't do it. You did it because you had to, because this is a totalitarian regime. You do not want to upset a dictator.
Right.
Yeah.
We're mourning. Yeah. If somebody asks, that's what we're doing.
Right. Yeah.
So then what happened? The guy's dead. This was his pet project.
Yeah. So this is when his son, Kim Jong-il, comes into power. And this mourning goes on for years. Well, we kind of jump ahead to 2005. This is when South Korean city Incheon is planning to host an Asian Athletics Championship. The South wants North Korea to participate. And the North bargains. They'll say, you know what? We'll send you athletes if Incheon funds the Ryugyong Hotel. This is how much they're still invested in it. It's a bargaining chip because this is a symbol of national pride. It is now in honor of their fallen eternal leader, their founding president and leader who has died. So this reminds me a lot of, what's it called? Sunken cost fallacy, where you just keep putting more money into something, throwing good money after bad, because now pride is on the line. And we're going to look like idiots. Even though this thing has been empty, abandoned, probably falling apart, substandard materials.
Right.
It probably would have been better just to knock it down and put something else up there. But it's, no.
That at that point, you're admitting you were wrong.
Exactly.
And we can never, ever have that. If they had to show to the people that they were fallible in any way, then it would undermine the whole eternal president thing and the supreme leader thing. And the way that they almost treat their leaders like monarchs. Well, they pretty much are in a lot of ways.
So the deal with South Korea falls through. So that doesn't happen. But there is relief in 2008 from a little company, a little telecommunications company. What country affiliation? Think about this building. What country do you think? It's not really a country, but where this company is from. Who do you think comes to the aid of this monolithic hotel just sitting there?
Oh my God, no, I have no clue.
Egypt. It's an
Egypt. What?
Speaking of the pyramid shape, it's an Egyptian telecommunications company, Osracom. And basically they want to expand into an untapped foreign market with radio towers and expand their telecom presence. So they strike a deal. We can install our network on your building, and in exchange, we're going to fix up this eyesore you have that you can't fix on your own. So this is when they start putting the mirrored glass and the metal cladding on the building. So the kind of the ridge lines, if you will, of the building get this sleek metal, and the whole middle part, which is just these empty, it almost looks like someone's punched holes in concrete. And it's almost like a waffle board or something. And that starts to get covered by this really nice mirrored glass. And this is finally when they remove the crane. And this is an interesting story that I found. So the crane gets removed. And this is an interesting story of someone who was in Pyongyang at the time. This is 2009. And this person says it was a very foggy day and you couldn't even see the top of the building, but you could hear very loud helicopter noises, which is not common in Pyongyang. And about an hour later, the fog cleared and the crane was gone.
Oh my God. So they were trying to even hide that.
You know, it's funny. I don't know if it was because it was like, oh, let's just do it and take it away. Or like if it happened that way by just dumb luck or happenstance, or if it was intentional. But I just thought that was super
crazy.
Fascinating.
The fact that we don't know, that we can't say for sure, just says a lot about what we think.
100%. That's the thing.
No trust.
I tried to find a lot of different sources. Obviously, I didn't go straight to North Korea, but people who worked there, who were living there at the time, trying to just get some different intel to see if the stories line up. What's really interesting also around this time, Orascom's chief operating officer said that the building didn't have too many problems and that the structural issues of the building could be resolved. So that's going on. And 2011, Kim Jong-il dies. But progress seems to continue because 2012, the project is completed. The eternal President Kim Il-sung's 100th birthday celebration. This is a huge deal. The building is completed. Again, you can't see me right now. I'm doing air quotes. Why do you think I'm doing air quotes, Allison?
'Cause it's yes.
Empty AF. It
Yes.
is a cardboard DeLorean. There is nothing inside when you open those doors.
Not a damn thing.
So again, if you look at the pictures, the outside looks pretty. It looks really nice. It looks super sleek. Nothing inside. It's all show.
It's such a metaphor for so many people and this whole concept of what they were doing in the first place.
Yeah. This other group comes in about 2012 and 13. They want to work on the hotel. There's some conflicting reasons as to why they back out, but this is also when some missile testing is going on, some nuclear missile testing. And so perhaps that's part of it. And there's been some rumors that Russia and China have had an interest in kind of reinvigorating and finishing out this hotel. What was really super fascinating, 2018, this activity is being seen, and there's workers on the outside, and there's speculation as to what's going on. And in April, out of nowhere, the hotel suddenly lights up with LED lights.
Oh man, they turned it into like a Vegas attraction
/ propaganda machine. So the top has the flag of the DPRK on that top cone. And one whole side, so it's like 3-sided if you look at it, one whole side is LED screens. And they show these videos and movies. And again, it's just basically propaganda for how great North Korea is.
Chilling.
Again, all of this effort put into show. The last information I could find is 2019. So as of June 2019, a sign was put up of the hotel's name in both Korean and English over the main entrance. And there's an Australian national who was detained in 2019, espionage charges. So Alec Sigley, he had visited the country multiple times and had done like I think like an exchange program, or was, I can't quite remember, but he was there kind of learning and came back and visited multiple times and started his own tour company of North Korea. And he would share photos and blog about it. Well, a tweet went out about the interior of the Ryugyong Hotel, and it's empty. You can go look these up on the internet. Concrete, empty, just nothing.
God, not even it's basically just straight up artifice. It's just... It's a frame holding up a mirrored sign.
Yeah.
Now.
And this story runs on NK News, which is basically like a news source from and about North Korea. Not from, but about North Korea. And right around that time is when he gets detained for espionage charges. Though the North Korean government says, no, that's not the reason they did it. But the speculation is basically, they kind of got under the skin of the grandson. This is meant to be the triumphant part of the eternal president. Like, this is in honor of his legacy. Wasn't a super huge fan of that. But yeah, barren rooms, empty verandas, just a concrete everywhere. So I thought that was super crazy fascinating. And that's the latest. As of now in 2022, I couldn't find anything beyond that.
I don't imagine that it'll ever be anything more than what it is. I feel like it's a perfect mechanism for them now to use it as basically a giant projector. And also, I guess, to sell this image that they're trying to make sure people stay fed under. Like, that's, was the ultimate goal in many ways of building it in the first place, was to like show their strength and might to everyone.
Right.
So that's what it's doing, just not as a building that you can go in and do anything.
So according to people in North Korea, again, this is a little, I guess you could call it insider information from the country, at least. The belief is very much the policy of North Korea to open the hotel. And the idea would be is they would open about 6 to 24 floors of the hotel, which would be a much easier lift, right? Some of the bottom floors and then the top. But still, you have this entire middle that is just nothing. But, we were talking offline about liminal spaces, right? These like back corridors of hotels and everything. This is a massive liminal space. If you're going to have 80 floors that are empty.
I would love to go in it. That would be something, finished or not finished. I think it
Yeah,
would be interesting to see what a finished hotel there would look like.
sure.
It's hard to imagine life in North Korea only because it's shrouded with so much that we don't know, that we're not allowed to see, and
Right.
we can't communicate with the people, the citizens there. So it's just it leads the imagination to crazy places.
It's such an interesting fascination. And particularly, it feels like of the three leaders, Kim Jong Il, the previous leader, he just seemed to have such a cult of personality. I don't know that Kim Jong Un quite has that, but it's fascinating on one hand. You know, it's kind of like you and I talk a lot about true crime, and it's like it's really fascinating to get inside the head of somebody who would do something terrible. But when it becomes entertainment or titillating, it's someone died, right? And in this case, it's like we have a bankrupt, by all accounts, starving populace that is basically treated like at the. I read something that like if they needed something to happen in the country, they could basically go to North Korean students and say, okay, you're construction workers now. Build what we need. And just to use people to your whims. It's just so dark. It's just,
Oh, it is.
it's really crazy. And the last thing I just want to say about the hotel is like, there's a lot of questions. Is it even structurally sound? Like if they do actually go ahead and open this thing, because I think, sometime within the last 10 years, a 23-story building in North Korea collapsed because of the construction. And this one, again, there's a lot of mystery. Like apparently the shafts weren't aligned correctly. The concrete foundation was said to be sagging, not built with steel. So part of it too is like if they want to update it, it's really hard to do when it's reinforced concrete. It's so much easier
Right.
when it's steel. So if you want to update all of the wiring and
Oh, God.
everything that's clearly 1980 specifications, or ventilation systems like that too. Like all of that infrastructure is just going to be so much harder to do.
And is it seismically active there? I would
That's a good
imagine it
point.
would be.
I don't actually know.
Because could you imagine an earthquake could just absolutely take that thing down? I
Well, if you
I
think
can't
about
imagine
it. Fukushima was a tsunami caused by an earthquake in the ocean, right?
Yes. Yes. But I mean, there are earthquakes and volcanic eruptions in Japan a lot.
Right.
So I imagine there would have to be some seismic activity in Korea,
That's a great
in
question.
that peninsula there. But man, I mean, it's just, I couldn't imagine. And then the scary thing is we might not know. The last update that we had on this was 2018. I wonder what it actually really looks like right now, because we're given images. We don't know how they're all older. Who knows?
Well, and what's interesting too is if you look at the construction photos, again, this is a lot of perception. If you look at it now, you're like, oh, wow, think of a purely glass building that's built, here, Saudi Arabia, like China, where these really modern, all glass, beautiful buildings are. Those are truly all glass. This just looks like it's all glass. That is facade. What is behind it, those are not all full windows. And that's another aspect of this too. It's a perception. And there's just something to me about what would drive a country, a dictator really, to not bankrupt, but really sink a lot of precious dollars from their economy into a project like this for nothing but one-upmanship. And here we are 34 years later, and the fight is being now carried on by the grandson of the original person. This just reminds me a lot of like Family Feuds, right? Of just people who they can't let something go.
Right. That's absolutely fascinating when you think about it that way. And this being put on this kind of level in a country where there's already tremendous hardship. We're always on the brink of an explosive situation with them because in many ways the government is just very desperate, but they can't show it. So it's just, I feel for those people, but I still want to go in that building. So,
Well, we're going to talk about why we have a fascination with stuff like this.
yeah. It's
But we've got some more structures to talk about, don't we?
we do, and we'll go move it a little faster with these next couple because while they're very interesting, a lot of they kind of explain themselves in some way. So I want to talk about a very famous building for anybody who is even remotely familiar with New York or has seen certain movies like Rosemary's Baby. It's a landmark building in New York, in the Dakota building. That's not the main reason that it's famous. Anybody who ever heard of a guy named John Lennon, this sort of small time musician, and his wife Yoko Ono, they lived in the Dakota, and a crazed fan gunned John Lennon down in front of that building in 1980.
Another castle-looking building.
Yes, this building is the quintessential Gothic Manhattan. Looks like something out of Batman. It's very much of that time period in which it was built, the late 1800s. Just was really into that sort of Gothic-looking structure. So, as I said before, it famously housed John Lennon, but it's also very much a beacon for like notable people. A ton of famous people have lived in this building. But I'll get to that in just a second. Here's some basics, kid. The Dakota building sits at 72nd Street at Central Park West. It was originally commissioned to be built by the Singer Sewing Machine Company founder, Edward Clark. He spent $1 million and intended for it to be a residence for 60 families, including his own. However, Clark died 2 years before the building's completion. He never got to see his dream come true. So already we're at tragedy number one, associated in some way with people at the Dakota. No, we'll get into that a little bit more. But why did they call it the Dakota? At the time, the west end of Manhattan, where this sits, was so underdeveloped and far from the main hub of the city. And so it was humorously intended as a way to say that it's so far out west, it might as well be in the Dakotas. Like it's that far. Yeah. So
that's hilarious.
So that stuck. And so anybody who looks at this, and like I mentioned Rosemary's Baby before, because it's one of the more famous exterior depictions of this building in a well-known film. It's a pretty scary, fun little treat made by Roman Polanski, starring Mia Farrow, pregnant with the Antichrist. Let's just get it out there. So it's by all means kind of like one of the legendary horror films.
Don't get much darker than Pregnant with the Antichrist.
Good movie, but I really like this one. So, and really you have that Gothic architecture. It's like the perfect look for a woman impregnated with Satan. So here's some interesting trivia, though, about Rosemary's Baby. Just a quick aside. So it was directed by Roman Polanski, and there was a lot of bad juju on the film set. It was just a very troubled production, sort of like The Exorcist in its own way. And so after filming wrapped, several people involved in the production started experiencing really crappy thing, like bad luck kind of stuff. Like the film's composer fell into an eerie like coma. Like it's like he had a stroke, fell into a coma that was like very similar to something that happened to a character in the story. It was just a weird out of nowhere kind of health scare. And then another producer, he ended up with a severe case of kidney stones. While he was in the hospital, he had vivid hallucinations about the movie. Like it just, haunted him.
Wow.
And so then director Roman Polanski's wife, for those really in Hollywood know, Sharon Tate, became increasingly interested in the occult as a result of this movie. It really kind of became a little obsession of hers, apparently. And she was infamously killed by members of the Manson family in sort of cultish looking ritual. It's just kind of it's so weird, right? Like those links in the chain. And so while none of this happened specifically at the Dakota, the pattern of strange deaths of famous people who, spent some time there is just kind of interesting to examine. So Marilyn Monroe did a photo shoot there a few years before her tragic and very controversial death. You could, again, that's a whole podcast in and of itself, Marilyn Monroe and all the conspiracies surrounding her and her death. Judy Garland lived there for a time before she died of a drug overdose in the UK. And then we have the building's original owner who died before it was completed. And its first official resident, composer Peter Tchaikovsky of the Nutcracker fame there. There's also been a lot of debate surrounding his official cause of death. So it's just like kind of a weird sort of thing. Like when you think about Hollywood tragedies or the tragedies of famous people, a lot of them have passed through the Dakota at some point. Yeah. It's almost like a weird little nexus. And so that leads people to say, of course, there's a curse on the building or the property and whatnot. So other residents have also reported paranormal activities there over the years. John Lennon himself claimed to have seen a ghost there on more than one occasion. And Yoko feels like she's seen John's spirit there as well. And other people have had like weird things happen with fixtures and chandeliers disappearing like from apartments, just like literally just vanishing. And one couple like claimed that they came in and found this chandelier in like there, it hadn't been there before, and then it disappeared. Weird, right? It's just weird stuff. And then the building has the potential for an even bigger curse. So get this. I don't know if you noticed it even looking at the outside of this building, but you'll see that it has no fire escapes.
Oh.
The architect, Henry J. Hardenberg, feared it would mar the look of the building, so he opted to use high-level like fireproofing methods instead.
Isn't this kind of like the Titanic where they're like lifeboats?
That is literally in my notes right now. Yeah, that's exactly what that is. So if that building did catch on fire, it's 150 years old. Those techniques might not hold forever, right? So it's a 10th floor building with a lot of units in it. And so that's thousands of people.
It's a lot of Olive Gardens. A lot of Olive Gardens.
It's so many Olive Gardens. Lauren Bacall herself had a 9-room apartment. So you can get a pretty big unit in this place.
Yeah.
That's what she said.
Yeah.
So that brings me then to the notable residents that this place has had. One of the first families to move in was the Steinway family of the Steinway piano fortune. Other residents include Lauren Bacall, author Harlan Coben, Jack Palance, U2's Bono, and Maury Povich.
I'm sorry, Jack Palance, the actor?
Yes.
Whoa.
Right. We're talking about a city slicker. Am I right? Dang. That's a dated reference.
Also the mob boss from the first Batman movie?
That's correct. That's you.
Oh, my number one guy.
Oh, God. I loved him in that movie. I think
Jack Palance, man.
Yep.
Oh, my God. He's a terrifying person. Talk about, creepy.
Yeah. He had a great screen presence. And so that's just a selection of people that have lived in there. And you certainly can't be poor. Apartments in this place have sold for as much as $21 million. And there's currently a unit for sale that has been vacant for 8 years and is currently listed at $14 million. But why is it vacant? Because
the place is terrifying.
Well, yeah, I think there might be an element of that. But no, it's because the co-op board there is just a bunch of stickling a-holes. This is the list of people that they have rejected for apartments there. Melanie Griffith and Antonia Banderas, Cher, Billy Joel, Madonna, Carly Simon, Alex Rodriguez, and Judd Apatow have all been rejected.
Okay, I thought you were going to give a much different list than that. Like, I'm just trying to even think who would be on that list.
Kid Rock.
Kid Rock.
Larry the Cable Guy. I don't know. I guess that's following a theme. I
was going to say like Kevin Spacey or...
like people that are really gross.
Repugnant and have shown their true colors. Yeah, I thought it was going to be people like that. I'm sorry. What's Melanie Griffith ever done to you?
Yeah, exactly.
And Anthony Flaggs? Give me a break.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just feeling like if Madonna can't get into this place, I mean, for crying out loud.
I mean, if she came in with her fake British accent, I'd be like, move along, sister. I could, that one I'll let slide.
That's
those
true.
Other people, or like, Alec Baldwin, he's got a little temper, right? I could see it, like,
Yeah.
We don't want you here. Or Sean Penn, he's, anyway.
There might be an element too of like, yeah, if you're too famous, then you'll attract too much attention to the building. Maybe that's my guess. I didn't see that listed. I feel like the co-op is this shadowy like figure. Again, the demon basement factor.
They're like the people who do the ratings for the movies, right? This little like cabal of people. Here's my thing. How many people can afford a $14 million apartment? How many of those people want to live in this particular apartment, live in New York, or want to live in New York? Apparently, they rather have an 8-year vacancy.
Oh, yeah. They're making enough money, I guess. And for a building that could potentially burn down and kill you inside it because you can't get out.
That's the other thing.
But it's a status thing, man. It's like you live in the Dakota. I mean, that's one of those things that it is a hot landmark, especially in the years since John Lennon's death. I think that event really put that building on the map in a big way. Before it was like just kind of a quiet, exclusive little apartment building for celebrities and whatnot. And now it's like basically a shrine to John Lennon out there in front of the place. And so it's It's difficult and understandable why they might not want that kind of attention, but it's definitely an interesting piece of ground and very notable in its own way. And who knows what may happen as the years go by. But
What's the last death? What's the last death?
The last death.
Has it been a while?
I don't think anything major happened there after that. It's just that if you've happened to be in the building, you're going to carry some psychic stank with you and something horrible could happen. So,
or it's like and it's in its dormancy and the building's going to wake up and it's going to feed.
It cycles, and then we could head straight into Ghostbusters territory. It's going to increase paranormal activity throughout the city.
There it is.
There we go. Psychic antennas. Yeah.
Plot for Ghostbusters 4, book it.
Let's do this thing. So yeah, that's my little side piece.
You're entertaining yourself over there. I love it.
Sorry. Yeah.
You got units and side pieces.
You'll see a picture of my side piece. I'll put it on the socials.
Please do. It's hot.
But now I want to talk about yours because when you told me you were doing this, this is why I can't make this just about buildings, you guys. We promised in the teaser earlier that we would have something not a building.
You know, Allison gave me an assignment, which was architecture. And as I was going through and looking, I was like, yeah, I could do a building, but there's just this structure that, again, it's kind of like the hotel. Once it got into my head, I couldn't get it out. There's just something freaking creepy about it. And I'm talking about a roller coaster, as it turns out, which is also kind of fascinating. Something built for amusement, which is just dark and sinister and kind of crazy looking. And I'm talking about the Crystal Beach Cyclone. So we're talking like the late 1920s, the roaring 20s, kid.
Yes. Okay, this is a very famous coaster. Okay.
It is. We're going to have a lot of transatlantic accents in here. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the Crystal Beach Cyclone, first off, much like the hotel, just stop what you're doing right now. If you're in a car, please don't do this. Pull over. Look up Crystal Beach Cyclone. This coaster looks like a nightmare. I love roller coasters. Allison, are you a coaster lover?
I was once a heavy roller coaster enthusiast. Absolutely.
I have not ridden one in, I don't even know how long.
Yeah.
It's been a decade, maybe? It's been a long time. I was in it. In my 20s, I was into coasters like no one's business. But I don't know if I'd ride this one.
No.
I really don't know if I would.
I'm looking at it. I mean, my threshold is pretty, like, I know you were like super into them. I was for a bit at the Kings Island, we're Ohio people. Sure. Ohio shout out.
Cedar Point.
Point. We have some, if you come to the state for anything, you're coming for the amusement parks. They're, those two are fantastic, and some legendary coasters. But there came a point for me, and I think there's always been a point of like barely restrained like anxiety and panic that I always have right before I get on one. And I think me riding a coaster takes a bit of like that, like I have to like muster it up, the courage. Sure. And then it's just so exhausting. And also my inner ear is a little weird. So I started getting some vertigo and nausea after I'd get off the coaster. So that's one reason I don't do it really much. Although I did ride a few. I took Elias, my son, to Kings Island a few years ago, and I rode a few coasters, and I realized that I don't have it like I used to, man. I really don't.
It's a young person's game. It really is.
Yeah.
We all reach up. I mean, you don't see a lot of 90-year-olds on roller coasters, and for good reason. It can take it out of you, especially the Crystal Beach Cyclone, which was one of the terrifying triplet of highly extreme and vicious roller coasters designed and built by Harry G. Traver in the late 1920s. And this one was located Crystal Beach Park, Ontario, Canada. So let's learn a little bit about this coaster. As I said, these three coasters, known as the terrifying triplet, were designed and built by the Giant Cyclone safety coasters. So the three coasters are the Crystal Beach Cyclone and the Revere Beach Lightning, which both opened in 1927. And then a year later at Palisades Park in Fort Lee, New Jersey, a Cyclone, it sounds like it was just the duplicate and also named the Cyclone, was opened in 1928. Giant Cyclone safety coasters, what do you think their main feature would be based on that name?
Restraints? Or
Safety?
the things that hold, the things that hold you in the thing.
Well, these were a model line of roller coasters which were designed and marketed, again, by Harry Traver and his company, Traver Engineering, in the 1920s. So despite their name, here's the problem. They had a dangerous reputation and were regarded by many historians as some of the most fearsome roller coasters ever built. So the name is a little bit of an advertising BS scenario.
Right, right.
Here's what's crazy about them. This is the geometry of these tracks. They feature very tight turns, spirals, figure eights. Again, look at this.
I don't know how you could
photo.
how that's even like physically possible. It is.
This feels like a coaster somebody made on Roller Coaster Tycoon or one of these games where you're making something that defies physics, or a monster or a giant came along and twisted this coaster.
One of the hills in it looks almost like vertical.
It feels like an optical illusion in some cases. You're like, is this thing even for real? So all of these elements, a lot of their coasters banked to very steep angles, some of them approaching 85 degrees. That's not an 85-degree drop. That is a bank.
Yeah.
You were practically sideways going around some of these turns. Another common element were these undulating jazz tracks. I think they're also called...
Like jazz hands. Sorry.
It was the 20s.
I'm just
Wackadoo,
watching people
wackadoo.
do the Charleston now all of a sudden.
It had another element called these jazz tracks, these undulating sections of track, and there was almost no straight track on this entire coaster.
It's all curve.
Nothing was ever flat or straight. All curves, all twists, all jazz tracks, all spirals, figure eights. Everything is just twisting you back and forth. Cyclone is a very apt name for this. Traver's coasters were described as embodying the reckless spirit of the 1920s.
Yeah,
Sounds about right.
We know where all that all ended. Yeah.
So the ride itself lasts about 40 seconds. So it's super short. When you add in the lift hill, it's about 70 seconds. By all accounts, riders would experience 4 Gs of force. 4 gravities.
It's
a lot,
amazing
folks.
that people didn't pass out. I'm sure they had to have. I would imagine for like lay people, like people that aren't used to being exposed. I think there's a coaster at Kings Island. They called it the Face Off back when it first opened, when the park was owned by Paramount. And I can't remember what it's called now. I think it's the Banshee is what they call it now. That's right. They've changed it. Yeah, another owner took it over and renamed everything again. And so anyway, you're face forward. It's hanging from the track. The car is, and you facing forward, going through it once, and then it reverses and it takes you back through, and then you're going backwards. And they talk about there are areas of that coaster where you can experience up to like 2 Gs. And my first time I rode that coaster, I got so sick. And I felt dizzy for so long. It was one of my last coaster rides before I gave them up for 20 years. So 4 Gs, I'm imagining experiencing twice what made me very ill.
Yeah.
It would have to have vomit flying off of that coaster at all times. It's probably like you give people waiting in line like umbrellas because people are always barfing on this thing. Like, that's all I can imagine.
Interesting note. We're going to come back to both those things.
Okay.
Interesting note. So by all accounts, the max speed was about 52 to 60 miles per hour. So again, pretty fast, heavy Gs, flinging back and forth. It's a lot. So about 5 million rides have been given in the Cyclone's 20-year history, and only 1 fatality.
Wow.
The fatality did occur on opening day.
Ooh.
A individual allegedly stood up to take his suit coat off, and he was thrown from the train after the first drop and fell to his death.
Oh.
This is the worst part, being hit seconds later by the train he had been riding in. So he falls off near the top of the hill. The train comes and then hits him on the track below.
Wow. Oh, that's awful. It's amazing that it kept going after, you know what I mean? Like I don't mean like that it kept going after it hit him, like literally. I mean that the coaster like stayed open, that it wasn't, that they decided, this is all right. We could deal with this. Next, who wants to ride the Crystal Cyclone?
Yeah. And I should say this wasn't the grand opening, like the very first time it opened. This was opening day in 1938. So like the first day of the season of that particular, but I mean, what a terrible way to kick off that year.
Oh, for sure.
And apparently a failed lap bar was deemed to be the cause. And then a woman died on the sister coaster in 1927 after having jumped out. And there's not a lot of detail I could find as to how that happened, but I don't know if it's a similar failure of these restraints. Pretty big deal if you're going to call yourself the giant cyclone safety company, whatever the crap it was called.
Yeah.
A little bit of a misnomer. So the big deal about this is that there was a nurse station at the end of this coaster.
Oh.
To assist anyone if they fainted or were injured. Originally, apparently was hired to keep insurance costs lower. And then later rumored that she was kept on the payroll to help kind of keep up this image of this terrifying coaster. Oh, the word spreads. We're talking about it now. There was a nurse out there.
If you saw that yourself, would you want to go on that coaster? What's your threshold?
5 million rides.
Yeah.
5 million rides. Apparently it did.
Yeah, but what about you personally? What would you do?
Ooh, okay. I talked about this with you when we were talking about this topic, Son of Beast.
Yes.
So if you don't know Kings Island in Ohio and near Cincinnati, Kings Fair.
Oh, you mean
Kings Mill.
Kings Mill. Yeah.
Kings Mill, Ohio. This is a very old coaster there. It's brilliant. It's called the Beast. It's been there basically our entire lifetime. I think it was built in 79, 78.
Yeah.
Fantastic coaster. They built a newer coaster, this is early 2000s, called Son of Beast. It is going to be the world's longest, fastest,
and it had
tallest
a loop.
Wooden coaster with a loop. The only inverting, and it was going to beat all the records that the Beast may still even actually have for wooden coasters.
Speed and length.
Yeah, it may not have been longer, but it's actually taller and faster. That's right.
Right.
And this thing was also plagued with poor construction and design flaws from the outset. And much like the Cyclone, the trains were so heavy, they were actually just beating down on the structure and kind of ruining the track. So much so that Son of Beast, they had to remove the loop and put a lighter train in it so that it wouldn't damage the coaster. And so that's why eventually the loop went out. But this thing never ran. This is when I had a season pass. We were going during the summer multiple times a week. And it was always a gamble. Was Son of Beast going to be open?
Right.
And that thing was rough. I mean, I remember a few rides where it really jacked me up. So having said that, would I ride this thing? Well, I don't know. It's so hard to say. It looks like a nightmare.
It looks like you're absolutely right. And that's the thing about wooden coasters in particular, even new good ones. The Mean Streak at Cedar Point about killed my back for a few days. And I mean, so yeah, they lots of vibration, lots of jostling. Even the Beast is even more so now just because of its age. But even when we were riding it, when it was only still 18 years old at the time, it was still a bit of a jankety ride. And so that's what I would worry about. If I could guarantee that my spine would remain intact, maybe put me in a body brace so that
But here's the thing, wooden coasters are always going to be rickety no matter what.
Yeah.
This one's even a more extreme version of that.
Putting our own experience and having ridden a lot of coasters and applying what we know, having ridden a good number of them. And I'm sure a lot of you out there who too have spent a lot of time in amusement parks, just looking at that coaster is gut churning. And there's still though always that little glimmer, tiny as it may be, I wonder what that's got to feel like.
That's the crazy allure of it. Even though it's terrifying, you're like, I could survive it.
I mean, most people do. Well, it's like the risk ratio in your brain is going, how many people has this thing killed? Only one? Oh, okay. So we'll factor that in. And, they probably test these things every day for safety. I mean, you tell yourself that because you don't want to know the truth. That's just
right.
It's like it's that same level of trust that we give to restaurants that they're not spitting in the food. But we're just going to push that out of our brain so we can have fun. So
can I read you a couple of writer quotes? This is where the transatlantic accent, I apologize, is going to come in. Because when I read these words, I cannot read these in my normal voice.
Do it.
So this is from Irma Andrews. She was a pilot of biplanes and was a registered nurse at the age of 16. So she's seen and done some things. She said she rode the Cyclone a lot. I was quite used to thrilling rides, ho-hum passe, but it was a real pisser. Come on now. At one point, it looked like we were going right into the drink because the ride is built on stilts, you see, and it jutted out over the lake, and you turn and swoop right down there. They had a nurse station at the end of it because people will come off sick or injured. Oh my God, this is so great.
You go like right in the drink. Love
right in the
that.
drink, you see is here. It's built on stilts, you see. So good. Then she goes into this whole story. I won't go through all of it, where she's sitting next to this kid and she's basically on top of him. And what does she say? She's like, the ride was so violent that I guess we just got mixed in with each other. Like, she's basically like, she was on top of this kid and it was embarrassing. And then another quote was by a guy named Ed Mills, who was in the Canadian Army. So once again, he has this preamble. He's like, I was in the military. My friends and I were soldiers. We had this kind of nothing to fear mentality. We see this coaster and we're going. So he says he goes up. They're waiting in line and something smacks him in the face. And he looks at it. It's a wallet. Someone's wallet from their coaster had flown off and hit him in the face.
Oh, no.
So to your point about umbrellas, there you go.
Yeah, so there's money flying off of this thing. That's kind of cool.
It gives you money. They're paying me to ride, see? And then he says that he's smelling as they're waiting here, the stench of vomit as they're waiting to get on this coaster. So the vomit did come in. Yeah, he said it was very disconcerting, but they got on anyway. And then here we go to his account. It was our turn to ride, and we ran to the coaster cars. Up the steep ramp we went, up, and then up some more until we could see the entire amusement park. Just as I was enjoying the view, the car lurched forward, and I looked in front of me down a steep incline that looked like it must have been about 80 degrees slope. Cars then headed down the incline at warp speed, and all I could see in front of us was Lake Erie. I was sure there must have been part of the tracks missing, and then I uttered the only two words the entire ride. Jesus Christ! As we plunged down toward the lake. Then I see a steep bank to the right of the incline, and we changed directions in a split second, turning violently on our sides as the car careened around a hairpin turn. I looked sideways and saw the earth spinning by, and from that point on, most of the ride was pretty much a blur. The last thing he says is, very frankly, I was relieved to see the cars finally slowing down. Even then, they approached the unloading platform at such a speed that one would think they would overshoot and go right into the spectators.
Oh, wow.
But that's the thing. This thing had no brakes on it. You know, a lot of coasters will have like a brake point.
Yeah.
There's like a small part where there's a little bit of a brake, but other than that, this thing is just launching you forward on this wild ride.
That is terrifying.
Yeah.
To think about. And it's only 40 seconds, yes, but I think anybody in the last 2 years who has, say, I don't know, have had a cotton swab shoved right up their nose and they say it's only 10 seconds. It's amazing how terror and pain and anxiety can stretch a second out to feel like a minute. So 40 seconds, it doesn't sound like much, but damn, I think that would be the most vital 40 seconds of your life, where every sensor in your brain is just exploding like fireworks.
Yeah. Well, the coaster basically tore itself apart. Maintenance, it was billed on being like low maintenance, but ended up being a headache because of the high forces that were generated on the structure. It really just wore it down. They, I think, removed some cars from the trains to make them lighter, but at that point it really didn't matter. And basically somebody who used to work there said, it seemed like couldn't remember a week where it wasn't operating every day. It was just kind of tore itself apart and then eventually dismantled in 1946. But some of the wood and steel was repurposed for another coaster called the Comet that was built in 1948. So to my knowledge, that's still an operating coaster. So in some way, you might be able to ride a little bit of the legacy, hopefully a much smoother ride, of the Crystal Beach Cyclone.
Yeah, that is one I would absolutely ride. Looks like it's here or not here, where in New York. It's in Queensbury, New York, at the Great Escape. So, I mean, if you're in the New York area, drop on in. I would absolutely love to go on the Comet. It looks like it's a real piece of history.
Allison, how did we talk about we're just so fascinated. 2 hours flew by. What's going on?
I know. This got a little out of hand, as I'm sure some of these people that we talked about might be able to agree with their own projects that they said about. We have built a sprawling artifice of an episode. So we are going, I said artifice and I meant edifice. I always do that. Slightly different meanings there. So we had another thing we were going to talk about, and it was our own personal experience with a haunting structure. But we're going to roll that into another separate episode because we feel that there's enough content to generate a full episode. And we would very much like to be able to give the adventure that we had that day. We just want to be able to give that enough breathing space. So that's what we will do. Later this season, we will drop an episode about our first experience in trespassing together.
Breaking the law.
Good times.
We're wanted.
Statute of limitations has expired.
There is a statue of limitations.
A statue of limitations. That's right. This was so much fun. And,
it's great.
And if you have anything you'd like to add about the topics we spoke about today, if you have any additional trivia on these structures, feel free to drop me a line at email, dddarknesstime@gmail.com. You can reach out to me on the Twitter and the Instagram. Also, gonna put in a plug for you to check out Chris's podcast that he hosts with his buddy Ben, 80s High. Amazing 80s nostalgia at your fingertips. Cannot recommend it highly enough.
Like I say, if you like a little lightness with your darkness, that's a good counterbalance.
Yes, exactly. So go visit the 80s for some of that yummy lightness that they have going on over there. Gosh, anything else, Chris, before we wrap this thing up?
I think we've said enough today. Clearly we could talk for longer, and I guess we'll just have to save it for another episode.
All right, guys. Thanks for stopping by. We'll see you next time. Ding Dong Darkness Time has been brought to you and produced by yours truly, Allison Dixon. It was made possible by an array of amazing co-hosts, friends, family, but especially you, the listeners. Big shouts also go out to the brilliant Nathaniel Dixon for the show art and future legend Spencer Morlock for all the music. I'll be back again soon with another episode. In the meantime, be good, you little ding dongs.